Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session about securing your digital life. In this session with NRB and ProData, we are talking about a multi-layered approach in security. But let's first introduce a little bit the speakers. I'm Michael Boeks, CSO of NRB, and we have Selim Urtiano, security architect of ProData. Let me quickly pass through the short slides presenting our service lines and business. So the NRB group in general is composed of four main pillars. One pillar incorporating finance, industry, and public and social. One pillar healthcare, one local authorities, and one mid-sized companies. The NRB company and the ProData company are serving the French and the Flemish part in the pillar one. If you look at NRB in general, we are at approximately $500 million in 2020, and we are at 3,000 plus collaborators. And as you see, we just released the figure. We are releasing the figures for 2020, but the figures of 19 on EBIT, 10% will be at least around the same level. You look at the general service portfolio, we can go over consulting, digital transformation, managed staffing. We go to mainframe business, over the pure API-driven software development through security operations. If you look at the ProData NRB security offering, we have everything in the portfolio. So if you look at from an IT to OT level, we can support you on multiple levels, both from an operational run perspective to a high-level business consultancy perspective and towards specific products to be implemented. That's about the four positioning slides we have. Let's go into the security challenge. So typically what we have noticed building our security service line in the last couple of years is that there is a very big gap between the legal compliance and regulatory part and the technology focus. Both live their own life. And our key value proposition and in a long-term relationship with a customer is that we can combine those two worlds. Every business has certain regulatory and compliance needs. Every business has certain technology needs to be secure in their IT consumption. So the ambition of NRB is to combine those two worlds and give a clear focus on that. How do we do that? So today we're gonna present a view on the business and how do we translate this into a framework, a workable mapping to technology. Secondly, we're gonna discuss that in a use case proposition. Then we're going to discuss a technology approach where Selim will take over the use case and he will start talking about a technology approach on OT in the healthcare environment. Let's immediately deep dive. So what I want to point out here, and that's actually the main driver of this slide, is that every business has certain business services. If we're talking about fidelity cards, if we're talking about radio MRI in healthcare, if we're talking about car insurance, if we talk about public services or manufacturing, there are always components that have a certain business value. Those business values, those business solutions need to respect certain values, morals, like respecting privacy, like ensuring traceability, like remember Facebook last year, the securing of well-being in the digital world, preventing fraud. From there, a legislative effort is started. So you have the business service, and then you have the government who starts to regulate those requirements into a compliance framework. And then we see legal frameworks, legal compliance frameworks emerging, like the GDPR in Europe, like medical devices, that's more an industry branch, but also requirements, like financial sector with an FSMA in national bank regulations, like Schrems 2, who has certain requirements, like Cloud Act in the US, who has certain requirements. If we look at those requirements, they are basically created to do high risk mitigation. They protect you against reputational damage, legally, financial risk, or human risk. So if we look at that, so we have a business service, we have to ensure the quality, the legal and the quality of that business service, a certain legal obligation with a framework like a GDPR, and then you start translating those GDPR requirements into controls, and those controls are based on what you see as the risk you want to take versus a certain legislation. This, unfortunately, a legislation is not binary. It's always interpretable. So every company will put the bar at a certain level of what will they implement. And there are some implementation frameworks that can help us, but here, very important, an implementation framework is a choice for a company. A choice for a company is, for example, I want to comply to ISO 9000. I want to comply to ISO 27. I want to comply to NIST. The main driver of that is what? The main driver of that is that you have a certain provable governance, an audit trail, and you have a maturity path based on that framework. If you look in that, so we had business service, we had legal environment, we have now an implementation framework that's auditable. Then the key message of, and that is typically where the friction lays, the key message is, how do we translate that framework into controls and KPIs to technology services? We see a very big gap here. If you look at customers in general, they have a lot of technology services. They have a lot of, they typically have a lot of governance frameworks, but regularly we see that they are not living into the technology space because they are speaking different languages. Where we play, the key message there is that we can translate this very good into a technology framework, and that we also can then report clearly on each level of the organization, if it's CXO, if it's middle management, or it's technology engineering, we can clearly report based on those KPIs how our security posture is based on the technology services that we implement. When I'm talking of technology services, we will have a zoom later on what that means, but it's everything. It's firewall, it's cloud security, it's software security, it's basic infrastructure security. So we will touch deeper in that. So for last repetition, we have your business service, you have a legal compliancy that comes with that. With that legal compliance, you take a certain risk appetite and you implement a framework. That framework translates to controls that map to technology services. And then we can report to the business how we are performing from a security perspective for the business. And that value proposition is where we are gonna deep dive a little bit the use case here. So if you look at the use case, we had a customer who had a very big and complex IT landscape, had 3 regulatory bodies. So you had GDPR and you had 2 other industry bodies that were regulators. You had dispersed security solutions. So you had a lot of security solutions working in place, but not lacking a general overview, and you had no general maturity level on the security practice. The goal was to get a business service to map the business service to a regulatory framework. That regulatory framework should have a control, and those controls should be in should be mapped to KPIs. Controls towards technology security services and KPIs are being managed and implemented. So if you look at the general process put into place, this meant that the consultancy effort we defined was based on the input of the evidences needed, the controls needed, and we put an entire process into place to make this work. The outcome of that was that we did a full mapping, and that's what we're going to see now, a full mapping of their maturity, their actual maturity. So based on every endpoint, enterprise mobility, the current maturity mapping, and the future maturity mapping after 12 months. And then we said, okay, this is your roadmap. We agreed with the customer to a certain level of maturity they wanted to attain in function of the budgets. This is the technology aspects that we're going to implement for you. And then we are going to implement, or our ecosystem is going to implement, because we don't have every service on board. And maybe the company even decides not to use our services because we have a distinction in consultancy and operations. But you see that we have endpoint protection, identity and access, and we have a certain maturity level identified now, and we are in agreement with that customer. Where do we want to go? How do we want to move forward in the next 12 months to be better? And then if we have that deliverable defined and implemented, we can go and start doing monthly reporting on our build and operations effort. And that translates into dashboard reporting that's real. There are measurable KPIs behind this. For example, if you look at vulnerability management, you have your KPI around vulnerability scanning, you have a KPI around how many vulnerabilities are closed and open, so you have a trending. If you look at what is possible internally on the rate of threats detected in threat protection, you have a number of threats that we have detected. How do you answer to that threats? How did you follow up? So this is already on the CISO level or below, a very easy to read report for somebody who has a technology view on things. He understands what's here. If you go a level a little bit higher, if you go to the board and you already will have an effort to explain what is vulnerability or security incident management or endpoint security management. So on that level, you can take your board into the journey of building a security practice. Afterwards, you can go and move to a measurable maturity level every month, like you see in the right down corner, and you see for every service that has delivered how we are evolving together into get your company a more secure practice versus the goals you have put it out. So this, in a very big nutshell, will deliver you a mapping between your business process, your manufacturing process, your healthcare process, over the legally imposed requirements towards the controls and the KPIs you want to implement, and the technology services you want to do. This is where we play a key value. We can build together with you this framework based on the technology. We are by heart a technology company, but we can do those mappings, and we can have very good reporting. That's the use case of how to create an IT control framework. If we then look into, we had now a business view, and now we go into a technology view. If we go into the technology view, we have 4 pillars. We have physical infrastructure, we have security, infrastructure security, software security, and cloud security. Let me take a few of the services we have, but the service catalog is very complete, and we can always break out in a little bit more detail on how to do it. But for example, vulnerability management, a scan every month where we treat your vulnerabilities every month, and we take responsibility to mitigate it together with you. Another solution is everything that's around ransomware crypto locker. We do a tabletop exercise and we start with behavioral analysis solutions to validate if you have a crypto locker active, yes or no. But also there, this is a joint effort with consultancy. You need to have a tabletop exercise where questions are asked to your management. Are we going to pay? How do we communicate to the press? Because it will be out in the open. It will be known that you have been crypto locked. In the meantime, how do you remediate? How do you respond and how do you recover? So those questions need to be answered and we can assist you there. If you look at cloud security, we are talking about endpoint detection and response. We're talking about container security. We're talking about the typical CASB and SASE solutions. So for that, I'm going to leave the word to Zelim, who is presenting us with a use case around the OT in the medical healthcare environment. Zelim?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you. So like Michael said, I'm Selim. I'm actually an advisor for data systems and cybersecurity. Today, actually, what I want to bring on the table is the typical problem in general of the OT industry. But OT is not only on the production side, but we have it also in the medical environment. If you think about the medical environment or the hospitals, typically they have different things and that they need to protect. They have patient-sensitive data, the health data, could be telemetry data, data from devices that collect information of the health status, heartbeats, sugar states, and so on. So the biggest challenge is indeed the protection and the security around it, the governance. But at the same time, if it's a high risk and it gets impacted, we can have a risk on the revenue and the reputation for a hospital. So we are actually there for these organizations to actually assist them to avoid these major impacts. Then there is another aspect besides of the risk. There is a high vulnerability or the high vulnerable organizations like Vertical Hospital. They are using special devices. Special devices are maybe outdated on operating system level. They are being built, let's say, more exotically by a manufacturer. IT within the organization cannot do anything on these devices because they are managed by that vendor or special partner for these devices. So we create vulnerable environments, weak environments, and that makes it more attractive for intentionally bad people within the organization, maybe, but even from the outside, of course, right? And that makes it a good target for good information on patient data to sell it back to the back markets, but also to profit when you put all that data in an encrypted state and then start asking money for it with Bitcoins. So next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, whether we are talking about medical devices, in this case, we're talking about medical, these devices are out of date. Think about operating system Windows XP still running on these devices. Could be not been updated with correct firmwares. So what it means, there's no security. They leave it by default passwords. They even put stickers on the boxes itself and in front of the operating quarters. We actually want to make these organizations more aware and to use more security by design. So it means they're easy to hack. And what happens then is, of course, you can leave these things behind like botnets and manipulate these environments. At the same time, the big challenge in OT, it's not being managed, not a centralized, let's say, unified managed solution for all these OT devices. And even in other cases, these devices are fully not even segregated or segmented from the IT network. That means when somebody like a receptionist misclicks something and they're not well educated, it can propagate and actually the bad thing can actually exfiltrate to that OT network from the hospital. Again, impacting customer or let's say patient safety. Yeah, next slide, please. As I said, it's not only medical. When we're talking about in hospitals, we can talk on the right side and the bottom. You see typically medical sensors, patient monitoring solutions. But it can go further, right? We have IoT devices also applied for maybe coffee vending machines. Could be even voice over IP, smart building devices, sensors, and then even enterprise devices. So there is a big challenge in the ecosystem where we cannot properly manage because these devices are not a typical device like where we would install a typical agent on it. So how can we segmentate? And that's a big challenge. Maybe next slide. So what we actually want to apply and bring to these organizations is a way to be able to discover, identify, classify, and analyze those devices that are today on the network and see what the risk level is. Risk level, again, firmware, connectivity, these kind of things. At the same time, we would like to apply standards policies on all these devices because today they're being plugged in the network. They do their function as that device, but there is not, let's say, a governance policy, let's say a solution applied above that layer of these devices to maintain that corporate policy. So we would like to bring that also to table. And that's what we will do. And the other hand, of course, when there is something that, let's say, malfunctions or does strange behavioral things, we need to be able to detect it. And if something is detected, we need to block it. So indeed, we need to do threat prevention on those types of devices. Yes, next slide. Now, this would be an example what we've been working out for, let's say, a special hospital, right? So what we need to do is actually be able to segmentate, classify, as you see here on the left side, we will actually have medical devices, smart building devices, right? But at the same time, we would like to put the source or put an attribute or a tag to explain what this actually is. And then at the other side, we would actually define what kind of service is running on that, because then you can define that only service can actually exfiltrate or infiltrate data from one zone to another within that network. So bringing this all to into let's say a unified solution helps you actually organize and more govern and create your security policies. Yeah, next slide, please. So basically what I want to bring back to the table is we are here to help you guys. We actually want to minimize the impact on the OT infrastructure. We help you to identify what's on the network, to analyze the status. And we like to apply, of course, the policies together with specific frameworks to have that in a governance state. And of course, we have the prevent and the blocks phase. We need to prevent something when we detect something on that network, but at the same time, when it's a malicious, it's a strange behavioral device, strange network information is coming in from command and control environments, we need to be able to detect and then block that device from the network. Yeah, so that's me sailing from Prodata Systems. Thank you, Michael, back to you.
So as a conclusion, and then we have 5 minutes for Q&A. The key takeaway is that, first of all, NRB and Prodata can assist you on a multi approach of getting your security into check. This means that long-term, as a long-term relationship, we can build an IT control frame, a governance model that is real, that is not theoretical, that can be reported to, but also understandable for your system engineers, to your board members. And that's, for me, is a real value. It's a real value. Short term, we can assist you in the urgent needs. Typical urgent needs at this moment that we identify in the market is get your environment better protected against vulnerabilities, get answers and processes in place for ransomware protection, get your endpoint secured. Do COVID now, 9 out of 10 attacks come in through the endpoints at this moment. With the home working, less secure networks, this is getting more and more important. So both the long-term MSSP version, the short-term approach will help you to get first of all, a value proposition for your security practice, and that is really a mapping with your business line and in check. And it will eliminate the officer, the police officer that puts up his hand, you cannot do this. No, it will enable security and your business to get together into a position that you are protected and still serving your customers. And that's basically the key value proposition that we at ProData and NRB are presenting to you. I hope you could follow a bit. I know 30 minutes are short, surely do a digital process. In the meantime, as you could have been witnessing, my office has been cleaned. And I don't know if there are any questions or remarks from your side.
Thanks a lot, Michael, Michael, and Selim. Just a quick question for Selim. Can you give the examples of other IoT projects? Do you have IoT projects running?
Yeah, so we are working on a few of those, and we have had some sessions with let's say special verticals within the, let's say, organizations that consolidate OT typical production environments customers. So what we have been looking into labos, those that make maybe medicines, where they still have these let's say endpoints where they do analysis of things that are still connected with an existing LAN environment, let's say the business side of things. And we know that these typical devices are not being installed with, like Michael said, EDR kind of solutions, next generation antivirus solutions. So what happens typically that data, or let's say malicious hacker passes the information that he wants from one network to the other, exfiltrate data, can put these devices at risk for ransomware. So what we actually applying there is segmenting the network so that we can actually enforce harder security and actually mitigate these kind of things. But we are in a collaboration with a few of those kind of accounts. Yeah.
Yeah. More general question, gentlemen, how did you live or experience the MS Exchange hack? Michael or Selim?
Yeah, there you see that what I just mentioned about let's scan on vulnerabilities. Yeah? Before scanning on vulnerabilities, your patch management cycle and your lifecycle management cycle of your systems needs to be ensured. This is the first step. And we still see a lot of companies, and for sure, I have to be honest, in the Belgian market, we see this more than when we look at the international space, where patch management is optional. It's amazing. And this is what happened. If you look what the CERT said, 400 companies were impacted in Belgium, an estimation of the CERT, 400 companies. That means 400 companies have data loss and have encryption, because before we had the Chinese hacker group that was stealing data. From the moment the 0 day on 2 March came out, immediately the crypto lockers came in there, and you saw a massive traction on attack, and people currently are living in insecurity. Why are they living in security? Because they don't know if they are breached. Although, and I have to say, Microsoft did a very good effort to make it accessible for everybody. They created on the 16th of March, a fully automated forensic script was launched. We did the first forensics on 3 and 4 March, but even now, in 16 March, a fully automatic forensic analysis script was available. And you still have discussions with people in the industry that are not aware. And I do think this is an example of prioritization and not considering security as an insurance, because it's like paying an insurance in the boardroom, but as a real effort, like you would have on a workflow, 0 incidents, you should achieve on the digital space, 0 security incidents. And this should become a practice, a way of living. And that's, we're far from it. That's what Exchange Hack proved.
I think, Michael, just to add on that, a lot of organizations, they think they have the people, processes, and technologies in place, but there is still a, let's say, the reactive versus the proactive approach. You can say my patches are maybe up to date, but do you have a proper plan on vulnerability scanning, checking these things? Be ahead on the game and be as close to the gap of the vulnerabilities to close those gaps, and then you will win a lot already. So yeah.
Okay. I think we have to respect the timing. We're at minute 31, so I would like to thank Selim and Michael for their presentation. You will be available on the platform for all people that have been watching you. You can, of course, get in touch with the speakers. You get in touch with NRB and ProData through our virtual booth on the platform. And of course, later on, you can always send an email to one of both speakers and we'll get in touch with you. So thanks a lot for participating, watching this webinar, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot.
Oh,
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody.